slowly high on a hill, waiting for something new. I never wanted, I never knew all things green and blue.
Hello, my name is Warwick Rogers and I want to talk about growing up with Hornsby. I suppose when you look back to 1929 when I was born in Hornsby, things were a little different to what they are today. Others could quite rightly say I can go back further than 1929, and no doubt they can. However, I do not think that many can boast of living in the same house where they were born in 79 years ago. My residence is in Old Barara Road. I married my wife Elaine in 1958, and Elaine was a Broken Hill girl, and we reared 6 children: Lynette, Robin, Bruce, Craig, Brett and Dana. Having lived in the same house, which is now 95 years old, I have long-time memories of living in a street constructed of almost cobblestones, which was the case of every street running off the Pacific Highway, formerly known as Peachferry Road. The sound of the horses' hoofs striking the stones and the steel tyres of the carts over the stone surface. Street lights were low candle power and very few were located in the street. Memories of growing your own fruit and vegetables without the high-tech fertilisers or pest control chemicals, making your own butter, making your own soap in the big soap boxes, and having your own fowls for fresh eggs with the occasional luxury of chicken for dinner from our own birds. I wonder how many children today have had the thrill of holding day-old chicken or a fluffy duckling. In my opinion, they were not the good old days we hear many oldies speak of, but we had some memories that are hard to match in today's modern living. My radio was a crystal with a cat's whisker wire to tune in the stations, with earphones and an aerial wire strung up a tree. This I built myself. In latter years, with a large console valve radio, I would lay down alongside the radio and listen to Dad and Dave, or Yes What. Dreadful shows when you think back over the years. However, they depicted the era we lived in. In this modern age of television, video recorders, mobile telephones and computers, I sometimes think of my life may have been seen as boring, but I never saw it that way. It was healthy and fascinating. It was a life where you grew up through the years of gramophone records, cassettes and then CD players. Even these are becoming superseded in this electronic world. What a great imagination our folk had in their day to even consider Dick Tracy, wrist two-way radios. It was often talked about going to the moon, but who would have thought we could have seen in our day? Buck Rogers was not so much a fiction after all, and what does the future hold in this direction? I was the youngest of 11 children born to modest parents. My father migrated to Australia and to Plymouth with his parents at a very young age. My father was a journalist and author who wrote books under the nom de plume of John Henry. Having written several books, he had many manuscripts which were left unpublished, and to much to my delight were only recently located in the Mitchell Library. He died in 1937 at the age of 58 years, and his last employment was at Fowler's Pottery in Old Barara Road, now Story Park. My mother was born at Picton and died in 1964 at the age of 75 years. She worked tirelessly during the war years making camouflage nets for the armed services and devoted all her time to the war effort. I can recall the whole of our large room taken up by these huge nets. As a mother of 11 and widowed when I was 6 years of age, she certainly played her part in the community. Too young to realise at the time, I owe a great debt to my mother and father. They raised my 10 brothers and sisters in difficult times, and I did not realise what ethics and value of life they were passing on to me. I do not recall seeing the ocean until I was a young teenager. What a sight to see the waves rolling over the beach at Collaroy. It was a real ordeal to reach the beaches by public transport from Hornsby, and the cost of travelling was beyond our means. My feet were my biggest asset, and along with my sisters and brothers, we would walk for miles on hikes to various places to and from school. My early days of childhood, and as far back as I can remember, harbour memories of bushfires right to our back fence and across the road to the front. Memories of kerosene lights on Asquith railway station and kerosene lamps hanging from the ceiling in our home, the latter resulting many fires in various rooms in the house. Being close to the bush, we frequently had visits from various snakes and other wildlife. And I remember as a youngster my mother pinning a large black snake to the floor with a spade. They were the good old days, when you mowed the grass with a hand mower or cut the longer grass with a scythe or reaping hook, when you hung the meat out on the veranda in the meat safe. The only protection from the flies and insects was an old fly paper hanging nearby. The meat safe in latter years became an ice chest, and we bought ice from the ice vendor who came around in his horse and cart. Then the ice chest was modernised and became a kerosene fridge. This was a silent night built by Hornsby in his factory on Willoughby Road, Narrabeen. We had a bathroom water heated in an outside wood-fuelled copper, bucketed out into the bath, and you would have to double up to make the water last. The copper was used to boil clothes using the old bubbling action to dislodge the dirt. Difficult tasks would be carried out on the old rippled washboard. Now it's the modern electric programmed cycle agitator washing machine that wash and spin dry without effort. After the era of the copper, we graduated to a chip heater to enable us to have first hot shower and then hot water direct to the bath. They were the good old days, weren't they? Then there was the old fuel stove that used to heat the whole house. The first task in the morning was to chop the wood and light up the stove. There was always a kettle or a big cast iron urn of boiling water on the stove for a cuppa. The old stove was a great producer of soot over just about everything in the kitchen. It was also a good source of fires in the chimney with the build-up of soot. There would always be commercial travellers calling around for markets clerks, Griffiths teas, etc., and they enjoyed their cuppa. I always remember Griffiths tea. You saw the advertisements all along the railway line. So many miles to Griffiths Tea, which had their premises located in Wentworth Avenue in Sydney. And what about the old dunny out the back, with the spiders on the seat and the newspapers cut into strips, tied together with string, hanging on a nail driven into the wall or the back of the door? No rolls of soft toilet paper. We had recycling programs in operation even in those days. Old phone books found their way into the dunny. I have fond memories of the treks down to the backyard during a cold winter's night with the rain and the howling wind, blowing out the candle we used to light the way and burn off the cobwebs. With the dunny cart coming around once a week to shoulder the burden and making a racket while they did a stock take in the street outside our house. Are they the good old days I hear people talk about? It's very difficult to go back to my first memories of childhood, but living in Old Barara Road, Wilkinson's Dairy was located, which was then the end of the road, except for a cart track that led to Horn's property. The dairy covered all the area now occupied by several streets behind Amor Street. It was on Wilkinson's Dairy where I learned to ride a horse, drive a horse and cart, and learn how to milk a cow. It was a great outdoor life. At the bottom of Old Barara Road was a small waterfall near Horn's property. The waterfall was fed by a creek which ran the length of Ida Street. This was a very popular spot after school in the hot summer months. Today this is the junction of Old Barara Road and Middlebar Road. Wilkinson's Dairy had many memories, and those were the days when you put your billy can out near the gate and the milkman delivered your milk in pint or quart measures twice daily. Milk that was fresh and creamy, and of course if you left it in the morning sun too long, it was sour. You could also buy your fresh cream this way. Of course you also had the flies and insects too, if you did not provide a cover for open containers. As a schoolboy, I earned some pocket money working on the milk cart and sometimes taking the horses to be shod at Marshall's Blacksmiths in Hornsby. And what about the clothes prop man? How many remember him coming around the streets with his familiar cry of clothes props? Those who did not live near the bush would run and buy a thin 8 to 10 foot long sapling with a fork in the top to prop the clothesline up. Then there was the odd job man who knocked on your door looking to do any sort of work you could give them. Mostly they would just work for a meal. They were the tough times of the Depression. Do you remember the bottler who would come around in his horse and cart and buy all these old bottles from you? And what about the scrap metal dealers who used to come and look over your yard and buy all your old scrap metal? When I look at the children's toys of older today, I venture back to my toys. The only ones I remember were the ones I made myself, except for a wind-up Hornsby train and a few odd trucks. We used to make animals out of small potatoes, with matches for legs and smaller potatoes for heads. We made tanks from cotton reels with elastic bands, lubricated with soap to drive them. Cars made from matchboxes with a shoebox or small carton for a garage. Marbles was one of our big games, which is something you do not hear much of these days. Living with bush all around us, we used to use the bush as our playground. I often had a laugh at the advert which used to be on TV where the boy jumps off the roof of their garage. We used to do things like that and play Tarzan, and often the branches of the tree would break, resulting in grazed arms and legs. It was a fun-packed, healthy life just the same. Our swings were bits of rope strung over a tree branch with a bit of packing case for a seat. No fancy steel swings and play centres with plastic seats. As I grew older, we made billy carts with old pram wheels and any old bits of timber we could find. The billy cart came in handy when I had to run into Hornsby to do our shopping for our weekly groceries. And armed with the food ration coupons, I would take my billy cart into S.R. Buttle's grocery shop in Coronation Street and hand over my shopping list. The shop assistant would slide up and down the aisle on sawdust spread on the floor, stopping at the shelves and sliding the goods down the counter to me. There was certainly an art in serving in this style grocer's shop. No pre-packed goods with barcodes and use-by dates. Everything was sold in bulk and weighed on the spot. One could imagine the queues in the shops today if we had this system still in operation. You could even go into the grocer's shop and ask for 3 penn'orth of broken biscuits, served out of the big Arnott's biscuit tin. This would be enough to keep you going for about a week. We could also get almost free of charge enough spec fruit from the greengrowers to keep us healthy. As I became older, my billy cart was replaced by a second-hand scooter. And very few youngies owned a scooter, and it was equivalent to owning a Rolls Royce. I vaguely remember my first train trip to the city. I was waiting on Hornsby railway station when the train pulled in, and I asked my mother, "Where's the engine?" My only thoughts of trains were steam engines, and I had never seen an electric train. We lived about half a mile from the railway at Asquith, and we could hear the steam trains quite clearly, particularly on a cool, clear night. The Sydney Harbour Bridge was only a few years old at this stage, and I was born when construction first started. A trip into the city was, was a real ordeal, with the old red rattlers with wooden carriages and doors that would never close, windows with wooden shutters to keep out the sun, and of course the windows that rattled the whole journey. Before the bridge was opened, trains would terminate at Milson's Point. The termination point is still used for trains to stand during the non-peak hour periods. This area is directly behind Luna Park. No air conditioning in those days, just open up the windows. It became time to venture to school and enrolment at kindergarten in the old 2-storey brick building on the western side of the Pacific Highway. The school was later destroyed by fire and the site is now occupied by the Tape College. My first teacher was Miss Malcolmson. She was a real gem and a great 50 pupils to a class teacher. She was everything a teacher should be, but we have lost it completely. Many seem to blame the education system for modern day failure. The only thing that is missing is the discipline. Discipline was the authority which made you try much harder. School days were something I did not enjoy. Things were going okay for a few years, and then the war broke out in 1939, and it seems that many teachers were brought back out of retirement when the young teachers were sent overseas in the services. But still we knew what we had to do, and we came out with a standard which set us on the right track. The retired teachers still had the dedication and the ability to teach, but some of them lacked the patience, and the age gap was a real problem. The years 1939 to 45 saw Hornsby School have many changes in staff and pupils. Many of these younger teachers went to the war, as was the case of many of the senior pupils. A couple of teachers were very strict disciplinarians. In class, one particular week, teacher would beat you with a cane, anyone who did not show an interest in his questions. He expected everyone to have a go at the answer, and he would rush down the aisle with a rush of blood, which often showed on his face, and wielding the cane, targeting some unenthusiastic student who did not have his hand in the air. He had some colourful favourite terminology for anyone he considered not too bright, like "you miserable gawk," "you insufferable lout," "you chuckle-headed gawk," "you nincompoop," "you dimwit," and "double-dyed wart in the wool." These were just a few of those colourful phrases in his vocabulary. He had a habit of saying, "If you don't pay attention, I'll spear your head through the blackboard." And one young fellow was called out on a particular day to answer a question in front of the class. The teacher spoke of what he would do with the blackboard. The pupil reached up and pulled the blackboard down on this particular teacher's head, and consequently was on detention for his act. Unfortunately, the pupil was killed a few weeks after when he was hit by a bus on his push bike. In the primary school every Monday morning, it was customary for all pupils to line up in their respective class groups and recite, "I honour my God, I serve my King, I salute my flag." You would then, in your best voice, sing "God Save the King," and then all march into respective classrooms. I wonder what happens today. My first memory of the day war was declared was in 1939, was the sight of men armed with pieces of water pipe patrolling around the top of the water reservoir at the junction of Pacific Highway, Galston Road and Old Barrow Road. This was obviously so that our water supply could not be contaminated, but looking back, short lengths of water pipe was a very primitive protection. With war came the preparations for enemy attack, and like a lot of others, we set about digging an air raid shelter in the backyard. It was about 6 foot square with about 7 foot ceilings. It filled up with water the first lot of rain we had, which meant we had to dig quite a drain to find a level to drain off the water. It quickly bred mosquitoes and became a haven for spiders. I'm glad it was never used in earnest. War had its memories, with my brothers doing their part. Air raid sirens were installed at Hornsby Park and at Asquith on the Pacific Highway, opposite the railway station. Their eerie wailing could be heard around midday every day as they were tested operationally. I was a junior warden, together with my brother Russell, with the regulation yellow and black warden sign on the front of the house. It was our job to make sure the households in the immediate vicinity were properly blacked out with blackout paper over windows and glass doors. Cars were fitted with slotted hoods over their lights so they would not be seen from the sky. It was not until the Japanese, in their miniature submarines, attacked Sydney Harbour, where the air raid sirens heard in earnest. Only a youngster of 12 years of age, I can still clearly remember that night. School days brought some wartime experiences with evacuation drills from the classrooms too. And when the sirens sounded, we were all required to cross the Pacific Highway and head into the valley behind St Peter's Church. The Junior Technical School, as it was known then, was located on the eastern side of the Pacific Highway. The old single-floor wooden building foremost south was demolished and is now occupied by the new council administrative building. The remainder of the site is now occupied by TAFE College with some new extensions. On the subject of coupons, one of the ordeals I had to endure was queuing up at Gorman Hale's butcher shop on the Pacific Highway, until recently Barry's Homeware, to get the weekly meat ration. The queues would stretch for some distance along the footpath, and many would faint in the long queues during the hot summer's days. Of course, if we had any spare money, which was very seldom, on the way home we had a real treat and bought a real beaut ice block with quite a range of flavours for a penny from Stenderford's tuck shop, which is now Hornsby Locksmiths. Hornsby infants Hornsby Infants, the girls' domestic science school, and Hornsby Junior Technical School were the education home to many of Hornsby's old identities. Many of our women folk will remember the old domestic science school and the School of Arts. And what about the pictures, or the flicks as we used to call them? It was really a great place. Hornsby Theatre was opened in 1929, and it was a Saturday afternoon treat to go to the pictures for threepence and see Superman and cartoons, with news and 2 feature films. In latter years, Hornsby had 2 theatres. The Pacific Cabaret, now offices, used to take the overflow on Friday and Saturday. The cabaret was also the venue for boxing, wrestling and old-time dances. Many would remember dancing to Les Black's dance band. Les Black's nephew Ted still lives at Hornsby with his wife Barbara, both original Hornsby residents. After school I used to work to earn money for the pictures, etc. I worked for Phil and Norm Hobbs, the Aussie fruitier, opposite Jewell Street. I also worked for Yan's family fruit and vegetable shop, which used to be on the corner of Jewell Street and Pacific Highway. They were a great old Chinese family. Next door to where I lived was Mitten's Nursery, and I spent a few afternoons working in the flower beds after school. I also worked occasionally for Bill Collinbridge, who grew flowers and a few fruit trees. Part of the Collinbridge property now forms Link Road, and the house still stands today. There used to be a creek running right through Ida Street, and today there was a swimming pool immediately behind our place. This was on Stephen's property. In latter years the creek was piped all the way through to an outlet at the end of Old Barrow Road. Just down Old Barrow Road and opposite Wilkinson's Dairy was Smith's Cottage up on the hill. I remember the old windmill on the creek which ran between Ida Street and Old Barrow Road. This of course is now the site of Hornsby North Public School, and is built on the land once owned by the Smith family. My younger son Dana went to Hornsby North School. Across the valley in Manor Road was Marcus Clark's residence, and a suspension bridge used to run from Sylvia Street across the valley to the residence, which is now Mount Wilga Rehabilitation Centre. As a young teenager I used to walk across the bridge, but it was quite a hair-raising experience, with many of the planks missing or rotted. The bridge was finally destroyed in the bushfires, but remains can still be seen today and has a heritage listing. Now I remember the gypsies, how they would travel in the old cars, usually 2 or 3 carloads travelling together along the old Pacific Highway, and how they would want to tell you a fortune. It was a real worry. Then there was B. Miles. She used to come to Hornsby often. She was a legend in her time, very well educated and loved her poetry. Hornsby did not have a swimming pool in my younger days, and the infrequent school excursions to North Sydney Pool led us to a few waterholes. The fish ponds in the valley, Jacko's off Hall Road, and Litchie down the track behind Rove Park off Old Barrow Road were always worth a hike in hot weather. Snakes were always a problem, with some very large species being encountered from time to time. The postman would deliver your mail twice a day on a push bike and blow his whistle at your letterbox if there was any mail for you. No motorbikes then, and the telegram boy would deliver your telegrams. Telegrams today are, of course, just a memory of the past. I remember my childhood being simple and uncomplicated. We got the cane at school if we did wrong, and sometimes unwarranted in my way of thinking, but when we did wrong we deserved it. The police would give us a kick on the backside if needed, and you respected discipline and authority. Life was simple and uncomplicated, and it should have been left that way. It is funny how things stick in your mind. I can still see quite vividly Bill Wall's Pride and Joy, a blue and white international truck with a hard top roof. Bill Wall had a trucking business and lived off the highway near Citrus Avenue, with his house set back off the road. This area is present site of a housing estate. Many of Bill Wall's family still live in the area. Don Wall resides at Asquith and is currently president of Asquith Men's Bowling Club. Don's father played a major part in the establishment of the Asquith Bowling Club in 1950. The club was built with voluntary labour from significant donations made by many prominent business people. Many will recall the site of the bowling club as part of the old pottery and Donnelly's home of 12 children. The home became the original clubhouse. Adjacent on the corner of Lodge Street and Pacific Highway, there was a migrant camp after the war. Many migrants to Australia were housed in this area. Many doctors and similar professions had to work on manual labour, digging ditches, etc., for water mains and sewerage for a period of 2 years, if my memory serves me right, before they could qualify to work their profession in Australia. Many of these people bought properties in Hornsby and raised their families to make their contribution into this area. The old pottery located in Old Barrow Road was a dangerous place for us in our childhood days. The brick pit was quite deep and filled with dark brown stagnant water. The buildings were of corrugated iron and rusty and with very sharp edges. However, we used to outwit the caretaker and spend many hair-raising hours playing in the ruins, oblivious to the dangers lurking around the corner with the rusty exterior. We sometimes got unlucky and we used to get our backsides kicked when we were caught by the caretaker in the pottery yard. War saw the pottery transformed into an army camp with the soldiers drawn from all over Australia. The old corrugated iron buildings were not much protection from the weather and the soldiers lived in tents. This was just one of the many camps in the immediate area such as Pennant Hills. The old pottery is now the site of Story Park, which runs between Old Barrow Road and Lodge Street behind the Asquith Bowling Club. Just adjacent to Story Park stood a beautiful persimmon tree. This was actually on Stokes' property, but the fruit tasted very good just the same. While we're in the area, let's go back to the days before Jersey Street North was developed. Citrus Avenue got its name from the citrus orchard in the area through the railway. A major portion of this land houses Asquith Boys High School, where my 4 sons attended school. Roath Park, located off Galston Road, was the scene of many trotting ventures in the early days. Ron Savage had a particularly good trotter named Flying Peter, which he was the owner and driver, and he also raced his horse at Harold Park. The trotting circuit fell into a bad state of repairs for a while, but is now a credit to Hornsby Council and is constantly in use. I remember the Big Australia Day 150 years celebrations held at Roath Park. Before the development took place, we could watch the events at Roath Park and have a good view of Galston Road from our window. Another area which Hornsby Cycle Club used for racing was on Hopeful, off Spedding Road. This was after it ceased to be used as a shanty town. Hopeful is now occupied by modern homes, however a small park still exists today. I still have vivid memories of the little wooden body bus, a 12-seater, which ran from Mount Colah. It used to be affectionately known as the Butterbox. The little wooden body was built on a Chev chassis with all the timber work varnished. And what a sight in the mornings when people would be running late and get on board with an unfinished cup of tea or coffee. If you were regular and running late, the driver, Len Blow, would back up the road to pick you up. Hornsby was always the danger spot for bushfires, and many fires would burn for days in the area around Quarter Sessions Road and eventually be fanned in by strong hot westerly winds to move rapidly up through the valley, spreading out to engulf Galston Gorge and many streets off the valley. The 31st of January 1952 saw one of those violent days when the bushfire swept up from the valley and destroyed Percy Law's house on the corner of Bridge Road and Pacific Highway. It then jumped the highway and burnt out P.A. James' timber yard. 1957 saw a repeat of the bushfires with the destruction of Hornsby Domestic Science School and severe damage to the primary school and St Peter's Church.